The grey sky hung low over Ravenhollow like a shroud, its perpetual gloom having long ago seeped into the souls of the villagers who called this remote corner of the world home. Mist clung to the ancient cobblestones, twisting between the cramped, timber-framed houses whose facades leaned toward one another as if sharing secrets. Here, where the surrounding forest pressed close with its twisted black trees and the church bell's sombre toll, was the only measure of passing time. Superstition was as tangible as the damp that crept into bones. Eleanor Blackwood lived at the very edge of this forgotten place, her cottage partially obscured by the gnarled oaks that marked the boundary between civilization and wilderness. Once her home had been a place of warmth, herbs drying from ceiling beams, the comforting scent of bread and stew, and the laughter she shared with her husband, Thomas. But 3 winters had passed since illness claimed him, leaving her alone with nothing but her knowledge of plants, her quiet wisdom, and the suspicious glances of her neighbors. The wind carried the scent of coming rain as Eleanor gathered her basket of foraged mushrooms and hurried toward home. At 42, her beauty had matured rather than faded, her raven-black hair streaked with dignified silver, her green eyes sharp with intelligence beneath delicately arched brows. She wore her widow's black not as a symbol of mourning, but as armor against a village that increasingly viewed her solitude as something sinister. "Good day to you, Mrs. Blackwood," came a voice that carried no warmth. Eleanor turned to see Magistrate Caldwell watching her from the shadow of the smithy. His jowled face betrayed nothing, but his eyes, small and dark as river stones, followed her movements with calculated interest. "Good day, Magistrate," she replied, lowering her gaze appropriately. "We shall have rain before nightfall, I think." "Indeed," he said, stepping closer. "And what business brings you to the village today?" She held up her basket. "Just gathering what the forest provides. Winter will be upon us soon enough." His lips pressed into a thin line. "The forest provides for those who know its secrets. Tell me, from whom did you learn such knowledge?" "My grandmother taught me to recognize what nourishes and what harms," Eleanor answered, fighting to keep her voice even, "as her grandmother taught her before." Knowledge passed from woman to woman through generations." He leaned closer. "Curious how the Blackwood line has always kept to itself, is it not?" Before she could respond, the church door opened and Father Morris emerged, his thin frame swallowed by heavy robes. At his side walked Margaret Thorne, whose daughter had fallen ill 3 days prior. The woman's face was streaked with tears, and she clutched the priest's arm as if it were a lifeline. "There is nothing to be done but pray," Father Morris was saying, his voice carrying across the small square. "The child burns with fever that medicine cannot touch." Eleanor instinctively stepped forward. "Pardon, Father, but I have prepared a tincture of—" "We want none of your remedies," Margaret shrieked, her grief transforming into something harder. "It was after drinking your tea that Emily first complained of feeling strange." The square fell silent as villagers paused in their activities, turning to watch the confrontation unfold. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. "I gave her nothing but chamomile and honey," she said quietly, "to help her sleep after her cough." "Witch!" The word escaped Margaret's lips like the hiss of a snake. "My child thrashed all night, speaking of shadows that moved without bodies." Magistrate Caldwell placed a steadying hand on Margaret's shoulder while keeping his gaze fixed on Eleanor. "Perhaps Mrs. Blackwood should explain to us all exactly what she gave to the child." Eleanor clutched her basket tighter. "I have helped birth half the children in this village. I have set broken bones and eased fevers for 20 years among you. When did kindness become something to fear?" "When children began to sicken," Father Morris said coldly. "When crops failed in fields bordering your property, when Thomas Blackwood died so suddenly, leaving you in possession of everything." The accusation hung in the air, terrible in its implication. Eleanor felt her throat constrict. "My husband died of the wasting illness that took 3 others that winter." You know this, Father. You administered his last rites. Yet you alone remained untouched by sickness, Magistrate Caldwell observed. Curious, is it not? A murmur rippled through the gathering crowd. Eleanor saw hatred and fear in eyes that had once looked upon her with respect. The weight of their collective suspicion pressed against her like a physical force. I think, Caldwell continued with deliberate slowness, that it might be prudent for Mrs. Blackwood to remain within the town jail until we can determine the full extent of her practices. On what charge? Eleanor demanded, a spark of defiance breaking through her fear. Suspicion, he replied simply. These are dangerous times, and the safety of Ravenhollow must be my primary concern. Two men stepped forward at Caldwell's gesture, the blacksmith's son and a farmer whose broken arm Eleanor had set the previous spring. The betrayal stung worse than fear. Come along quietly, Caldwell advised. Let us not make a spectacle. But it was already too late for that. The crowd had grown, faces pale and watchful in the gathering gloom. Eleanor saw neighbors with whom she had shared meals, women whose children she had delivered, men whose wounds she had cleaned and bandaged. None would meet her eyes now. I have done nothing wrong, she said, but her voice was lost as thunder rumbled across the sky. The first drops of rain began to fall as they led her away, her basket of mushrooms abandoned in the mud. By the time they reached the small stone building that served as Ravenhollow's jail, the heavens had opened fully, rain slicing down in silver sheets. Eleanor was soaked to the skin, her black dress clinging to her frame, her hair plastered against her pale face. The cell was barely larger than a closet, a stone floor, a wooden bench, a small barred window set high in the wall. They pushed her inside without ceremony, and the iron-barred door closed with a finality that made her flinch. The town council will convene tomorrow, Caldwell informed her. Until then, I suggest you spend your time in prayer and contemplation of your sins. After they left, Eleanor sank onto the bench and wrapped her arms around herself, shivering in her wet clothes. Outside, the storm raged, lightning illuminating her prison in brief, harsh flashes. She thought of Emily Thorne, burning with fever, and wondered if the child would survive the night. She wondered if she herself would survive what was to come. As darkness fell completely, she became aware of a presence outside her window, a silhouette blacker than the night itself. The rain seemed to avoid this figure, though it stood directly beneath the open sky. Eleanor rose slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Who's there?" she whispered. The figure moved closer to her cell, and in a flash of lightning she glimpsed a face of such exquisite inhuman beauty that her breath caught in her throat. Pale as marble, with features sharp as if carved by a master's chisel, and eyes that gleamed like silver coins in the darkness. "My name is Sebastian," came a voice like distant thunder, soft yet carrying immense power. "And I have watched you for a very long time, Eleanor Blackwood." He moved to the bars of her cell door, his form seeming to dissolve and reform as he passed through shadows. Standing before her now, she saw he wore clothing of antiquated cut. A black frock coat over a waistcoat of deep crimson, a white shirt with a high collar, and an intricately tied cravat. His attire might have belonged to a nobleman of the previous century, yet showed no signs of age or wear. "How do you know my name?" she asked, finding her voice at last. "I know many things," Sebastian replied, his accent impossible to place, as if he had learned many languages over countless years, and they had all blended together within him. "I know that you are innocent of the crimes they suspect. I know that the child Emily suffers from a rare poison found in certain red-capped mushrooms that grow in the shadowed parts of the forest. Mushrooms her curious hands likely picked and tasted when her mother wasn't watching." Eleanor stared at him, recognition dawning. "Death caps! Of course, the fever, the hallucinations." "Indeed," Sebastian said with the faintest smile. "You understand much about this world's natural medicines and poisons. It is why I have observed you with such Interest. What are you? Eleanor whispered, for she was certain now that this beautiful, terrifying man was something other than human. Sebastian's smile widened, revealing teeth of perfect whiteness, and two elongated canines sharp enough to pierce flesh. I think you already know the answer to that question, wise woman. A vampire. The legends whispered around winter hearths, immortal beings who fed on blood and could not bear the touch of sunlight. Eleanor should have been terrified, yet she felt strangely calm in his presence. Why reveal yourself to me now? Because tomorrow they will try to kill you, he said matter-of-factly. The storm tonight will worsen Emily's condition. By morning, they will be calling for your blood. Eleanor sank back onto the bench, her legs suddenly unable to support her. And you care what happens to me because... Sebastian moved closer, his presence filling the tiny cell with something ancient and powerful. In 300 years of watching humanity stumble through its brief existence, I have rarely encountered a soul like yours. You heal without expectation of reward. You see beauty in what others fear. You understand the delicate balance between life and death. He paused, his silver eyes studying her face. And you remind me of someone I once knew, someone I could not save. Before Eleanor could respond, they heard footsteps approaching the jail. Sebastian moved to the darkest corner of the cell, his form seeming to blend with the shadows until he was nearly invisible. Whatever happens tomorrow, his voice whispered from the darkness, know that you are not alone. Then he was gone, leaving Eleanor to wonder if she had imagined the entire encounter, until she noticed a small vial glinting on the bench beside her. Inside was a clear liquid that smelled faintly of mint and something metallic she couldn't identify. For the child, his voice seemed to echo in her mind, 3 drops will neutralize the poison. The jail door opened and Father Morris entered, his face grave in the lantern light. I've come to hear your confession, Mrs. Blackwood, he announced without preamble. Eleanor slipped the vial into the folds of her skirt. I have nothing to confess, Father. His expression hardened. Then may God have mercy on your soul. Emily Thorne's condition has worsened. She speaks of demons crawling from the walls and begs for relief from the fire in her blood. Please, Eleanor said urgently, I can help her. There is a remedy. Silence, the priest snapped. Your potions and spells have done enough harm. The town council has already convened an emergency session. Given the severity of the child's condition, they feel waiting until morning would be imprudent. Cold fear gripped Eleanor's heart. What are you saying? Justice will be served tonight, Father Morris said, his voice devoid of the compassion his position should have demanded. They are gathering in the square now. Magistrate Caldwell feels a public reckoning will cleanse our community of the darkness you have brought upon it. As if to emphasize his words, angry voices could be heard approaching, dozens of them, accompanied by the flickering glow of torches, visible through the small window, despite the pouring rain. You cannot mean to... Eleanor couldn't bring herself to finish the thought. Witchcraft is punishable by death, Father Morris stated flatly. Traditionally by fire, but given the weather, Magistrate Caldwell has decreed stoning to be more practical. Eleanor felt the world tilt beneath her feet. These people, her neighbors, her community, intended to murder her under the guise of justice. And somewhere in the village, little Emily continued to suffer from a poison that Eleanor could cure, if only they would listen. The vial pressed against her leg, its presence both a comfort and a torment. If she could somehow get it to the child. The jail door burst open, and several men entered, their faces set in grim determination. Among them was Harold Thorne, Emily's father, his eyes red-rimmed and wild with grief and rage. "It's time," Magistrate Caldwell announced from the doorway. "Eleanor Blackwood, you will face the judgment of this community for your crimes against God and man." As rough hands seized her arms, Eleanor searched the shadows for any sign of Sebastian. Had he truly been there at all? Or was he merely a hallucination born of her fear? They dragged her out into the rain-lashed night, toward the town square where stones had been piled and the entire village waited. Lightning split the sky, illuminating faces contorted with hatred and fear. Faces that had once smiled at her in passing, that had once softened with gratitude when she eased their pain. The first stone was already clutched in Harold Thorne's white-knuckled hand as they forced Eleanor to her knees in the center of the square. She closed her eyes, bracing for the impact, whispering a silent prayer. Not to God, who seemed to have abandoned this place, but to the darkness itself. "Sebastian," she breathed, the name lost in the howling wind. "If you truly exist, if you truly care, help me save the child." Thunder cracked directly overhead, and when Eleanor opened her eyes, a figure stood before her, tall and imposing in his archaic finery, completely untouched by the downpour, as if the rain itself feared to touch him. Sebastian faced the stunned crowd, his body positioned between Eleanor and her would-be executioners. When he spoke, his voice carried above the storm with unnatural clarity. "If you wish to stone this innocent woman," he announced, silver eyes gleaming with dangerous light, "you will have to do so through my immortal flesh." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as Sebastian's presence commanded the square. The villagers drew back instinctively, their primitive instincts recognizing a predator among them, even if their minds could not articulate what they beheld. Magistrate Caldwell was the first to recover his voice. "Who are you to interfere with the justice of Ravenhollow?" he demanded, though his authoritative tone was undermined by the tremor in his words. Sebastian's lips curved into a smile that contained no warmth. "Justice," he repeated, the word elegant and dangerous on his tongue. "Is it justice to condemn knowledge out of ignorance, to murder wisdom out of fear?" He took a single step forward, and the entire crowd retreated. "I have witnessed centuries of your so-called justice. It reeks of the same stench every time, the powerful silencing those they do not understand." The rain continued to pour around them, yet it formed a perfect circle of dryness surrounding Sebastian and Eleanor. This unnatural phenomenon did not go unnoticed. Murmurs of devil, demon, and unholy rippled through the assembly. Father Morris pushed to the front, clutching his cross before him like a shield. "In the name of God, I command you to depart from this place." Sebastian regarded the priest with something akin to pity. "Your God and I have an understanding, Father. We rarely interfere in each other's affairs." His silver eyes flicked to the cross. "That trinket has power only against those who believe in it." Eleanor watched the exchange from her knees, rain soaking her to the bone, while Sebastian remained perfectly dry. She clutched the small vial in her palm, thinking of Emily. The child would die while these men posited about power and righteousness. "The girl," she said, her voice barely audible over the storm. Sebastian glanced down at her, understanding immediately. With fluid grace, he helped Eleanor to her feet, one arm protectively around her shoulders. "This woman is not your enemy," he announced to the crowd, "while you prepare to murder her. A child lies dying from a poison Eleanor can cure." Harold Thorne surged forward, stone still in hand. "Lies! She poisoned Emily herself." "Did she?" Sebastian's voice cut through the man's rage like a knife through silk. "Tell me, Master Thorne, does your daughter often play at the edge of the forest? Has she recently developed a fascination with gathering things, berries, flowers, perhaps mushrooms?" Harold faltered, confusion momentarily displacing his anger. She collects pretty things, little treasures, she calls them." "And did she recently show you any red-capped mushrooms? Small ones, with white stems and spots like snowflakes on their tops?" Margaret Thorne pushed through to stand beside her husband, her face pale. "Last week," she whispered. "She had them hidden in her apron pocket. I made her throw them away." "But not before she tasted one, I would wager," Sebastian continued. "Children are curious creatures, and forbidden things all the more enticing." Doubt flickered across the faces of the gathering. Eleanor seized the moment, holding up the small vial. "This will counter the poison," she said clearly. "3 drops only. It will break her fever and clear the hallucinations." "More witchcraft," Magistrate Caldwell accused, but his voice lacked conviction. Sebastian's eyes locked with the magistrate's, and something passed between them, a silent battle of wills that the human man was destined to lose. "You know she speaks truth, Caldwell. Just as you know, she did not cause the blight on Farmer Weston's North Field, nor did she bewitch the Millison boy who drowned last spring. You merely needed someone to blame, and a widow who lives alone makes a convenient target." Caldwell paled visibly, taking an involuntary step backward. "Let her save the child," Sebastian continued, his voice dropping to a hypnotic cadence that seemed to seep into the very minds of those who heard it. "Then, if you still wish to condemn her, you will have to face me again." A long moment of silence followed, broken only by the steady drumming of the rain. Then Harold Thorne dropped his stone and lunged forward, snatching the vial from Eleanor's hand. "If this kills my daughter," he growled, "no creature, mortal or otherwise, will keep me from your throat." "It will save her," Eleanor replied softly. "Go quickly." As the Thorns pushed through the crowd toward their home, Sebastian maintained his protective stance beside Eleanor. The villagers remained frozen in indecision, caught between their fear of the widow and their greater fear of her inhuman defender. "The council will reconvene when we learn the fate of the Thorn girl," Magistrate Caldwell announced, attempting to salvage some semblance of authority. "Until then, Mrs. Blackwood will return to her cell." "No." Sebastian's contradiction was soft but absolute. "She comes with me." Father Morris stepped forward, his religious conviction apparently overwhelming his survival instinct. "This woman remains under the jurisdiction of Ravenhollow until proven innocent or guilty." "Your jurisdiction," Sebastian replied, "ends where my patience does." He turned to Eleanor, his silver eyes softening slightly. "Your cottage, I believe, would be more comfortable than a cell." Before Eleanor could respond, Sebastian swept her into his arms with effortless strength. The crowd watched in horrified fascination as he turned toward the forest edge, carrying the accused witch as if she weighed nothing at all. "We will await news of Emily's recovery," Sebastian informed them. "Should anyone attempt to follow us before then, they will not return." With those parting words, he strode away from the square, moving with preternatural speed that soon carried them beyond the view of the stunned villagers. Eleanor closed her eyes against the disorienting sensation of traveling faster than humanly possible, the rain and wind whipping past them like spirits in the night. When she opened them again, they were standing outside her cottage. Sebastian set her gently on her feet, steadying her as she wavered slightly. "Thank you," she said, suddenly aware of how inadequate the words were for what he had done. "Do not thank me yet," he replied, his face grave. "I have merely postponed your execution, not prevented it." Eleanor fumbled with the latch on her door, her fingers stiff with cold. "Why involve yourself at all? Surely the fate of one village woman means nothing in your long existence." Sebastian reached past her, opening the door with ease. "I have my reasons," he said cryptically, gesturing for her to enter, none of which require immediate explanation. The cottage was dark and cold, the hearth long extinguished. Eleanor moved through the familiar space, lighting a candle before kneeling to revive the fire. Sebastian watched her from the doorway, seemingly unwilling to enter without invitation, a detail from the legends that apparently held some truth. "You may come in," Eleanor said, glancing over her shoulder, "though I imagine you could have entered regardless." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Some courtesies I maintain, even after centuries." He stepped across the threshold, closing the door behind him. "Tradition provides structure in an otherwise formless existence." As the fire caught and began to spread warmth through the small room, Eleanor removed her sodden outer garments and wrapped herself in a blanket. She studied Sebastian properly for the first time. noting how the candlelight cast no reflection in his silver eyes and how his skin possessed a translucent quality, like alabaster, illuminated from within. "You said I reminded you of someone," she ventured. "Someone you couldn't save." Something ancient and painful flickered across his perfect features. "Her name was Elise," he said after a moment. "She had your gift for healing, your independence of spirit. In 1647, they burned her while I lay trapped in my daytime rest, unable to reach her." He turned away, moving to examine the dried herbs hanging from Eleanor's ceiling. Human cruelty is remarkably consistent through the ages. Eleanor absorbed this, hearing the centuries of regret beneath his controlled tone. "Is that why you intervened tonight? Some form of atonement?" "Perhaps," Sebastian admitted, running long fingers over a bundle of dried lavender. "Or perhaps I simply tire of watching humans destroy what they should cherish." A sudden pounding at the door interrupted their conversation. Sebastian moved with blinding speed to position himself between Eleanor and the entrance, his posture instantly shifting from contemplative to predatory. "Eleanor Blackwood!" Harold Thorne's voice called out. "Open this door!" Eleanor and Sebastian exchanged a glance. It was far too soon for the remedy to have shown any effect. "He comes alone," Sebastian said quietly. "I hear only one heartbeat." Eleanor moved past him to open the door, revealing Harold standing in the rain, his face a mask of anguish. "Master Thorne," she greeted cautiously. "What news of Emily?" "She worsens," he said, his voice breaking. "The potion you gave, she vomited it immediately. Her body rejects everything we try to give her." He fell to his knees in the doorway, pride abandoned in the face of paternal desperation. "Please, whatever the cost, whatever you require of me, save my daughter." Eleanor felt a surge of compassion for the man who, less than an hour ago, had been prepared to stone her to death. "The remedy must remain in her system to work," she explained, already moving to gather supplies. "I will need to make a poultice instead, something her body can absorb through the skin." Sebastian watched the exchange with guarded interest. "You would help him after what he intended to do to you." Eleanor paused in her preparation, meeting Sebastian's silver gaze. "Wouldn't you? If you could save a child, regardless of her father's sins." Something unreadable passed through Sebastian's eyes. Respect, perhaps, or wonder. "You continue to surprise me, Eleanor Blackwood." She turned back to her work, gathering specific herbs and roots, crushing some while setting others to steep in hot water. "Master Thorne, I will need to come to your home to treat Emily directly." Harold nodded frantically. "Anything, anything at all." "The village will not welcome her return," Sebastian observed, "nor will Magistrate Caldwell appreciate this circumvention of his authority." "Then we shall not seek their welcome or their permission," Eleanor replied, wrapping her remedies in a clean cloth. She pulled a dry cloak around her shoulders and faced the two men. "Sebastian, will you accompany us? Your presence seems to discourage interference." His lips curved into that dangerous smile again. "Most certainly." The journey to the Thorne residence was swift and tense. Rain continued to fall, though less violently than before, and the village streets were deserted. Whether from the weather or from fear following Sebastian's appearance, Eleanor couldn't tell. They encountered no opposition until they reached the Thorne cottage, where Magistrate Caldwell and Father Morris stood conversing in low tones outside the door. "What is the meaning of this?" Caldwell demanded upon seeing them approach. "The accused was to remain confined until my daughter dies," Harold interrupted, pushing past him. "Step aside, Magistrate. This woman may be our only hope." Father Morris placed a restraining hand on Harold's arm. "Consider your immortal soul, man. To allow witchcraft under your roof. My concern is for my daughter's soul, not my own," Harold replied, shaking free of the priest's grip. "If Eleanor can save her, then let God judge me afterward." Sebastian stepped forward, his mere proximity causing both men to retreat involuntarily. Perhaps the good father and esteemed magistrate would care to observe the witchcraft, he suggested silkily, to ensure no dark rituals are performed. It was a challenge wrapped in politeness, one that neither man could refuse without appearing fearful. Reluctantly, they followed as Harold led Eleanor and Sebastian into his home. The scene inside was one of domestic tragedy. Margaret sat at her daughter's bedside, her face streaked with tears, clasping the hand of a small girl whose fever had brought an unnatural flush to her otherwise pallid face. Emily thrashed weakly beneath a thin blanket, her nightdress soaked with sweat, her lips moving in delirious murmurs. Eleanor moved to the child's side immediately, placing a gentle hand on her forehead. "She burns," she murmured. "How long has she been like this?" "The fever began 3 days ago," Margaret whispered, her earlier hostility completely absent. "But the hallucinations started last night. She speaks of shadows with teeth and trees that walk. Death-cap poisoning progresses in stages," Eleanor explained, unpacking her remedies. "First comes stomach distress, followed by a period of apparent improvement. Then the poison reaches the liver and kidneys." She met Margaret's gaze directly. "We must act quickly. What I'm about to do may seem strange, but I need you to trust me." Margaret looked to her husband, who nodded grimly. "Do what you must," she said. Eleanor worked methodically, creating a paste from various herbs and roots, adding drops of tinctures she had prepared. All the while, Sebastian stood watching from the corner, his silver eyes following her every movement with intense fascination. Father Morris clutched his cross and muttered prayers, while Magistrate Caldwell observed with barely concealed suspicion. "This poultice must be applied to her chest, directly over her heart," Eleanor instructed, handing the mixture to Margaret. "And this tea," she indicated a small cup of aromatic liquid, "must be given in small sips. Even if she resists, a few drops at a time will eventually stay down." As Margaret began applying the poultice, Emily's eyes suddenly flew open, glazed with fever, but focusing directly on Sebastian in the corner. "The Shadow Man," she whispered hoarsely. "He's come for me." Sebastian stiffened, his expression unreadable. Father Morris crossed himself hurriedly, while Caldwell's hand moved to the knife at his belt. "No, sweet one," Eleanor soothed, stroking the child's hair. "He's come to help you. The Shadow Man protects us." Emily's fever-bright eyes remained fixed on Sebastian. "Are you an angel?" she asked in a small voice. A strange expression crossed Sebastian's face, something between pain and dark amusement. "No, child," he replied softly. "I am very far from an angel." "But you glow," Emily insisted, her delirium lending her a strange clarity. "Like moonlight." Sebastian approached the bedside slowly, as if drawn against his will. When he spoke again, his voice carried a gentleness that transformed his features. "Rest now, little one. Let the medicine heal you." As if compelled by his words, Emily's eyes drifted closed, her breathing becoming more even. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Sebastian, noting the conflict evident in his immortal eyes. For a creature who had likely ended countless human lives over the centuries, he seemed strangely affected by this single child's suffering. "She needs quiet now," Eleanor instructed. "The next few hours will determine whether she recovers." They moved to the main room of the cottage, leaving Margaret to tend to her daughter. An uncomfortable silence settled over the group, broken only when Caldwell finally spoke. "If the child dies," he said, his voice low and menacing, "you will both answer for it." "If the child dies," Sebastian replied with equal menace, "it will be because your superstition delayed proper treatment." He stepped closer to the magistrate, moving with predatory grace. "But I wonder, Magistrate Caldwell, why you are so eager to see Eleanor condemned. What personal interest drives your persecution?" Caldwell blanched, taking an involuntary step backward. "I merely uphold the law and protect this community." "Do you?" Sebastian cocked his head, studying the man with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining a specimen. "Or do you protect your own secrets?" A tense silence followed this accusation, broken only when Harold re-entered from checking on his daughter. "Her fever seems less violent," he reported cautiously. And she's sleeping more peacefully. Eleanor nodded. The poultice is drawing the poison out. If she continues to improve through the night, she should recover. And if she does, Father Morris interjected, what then becomes of the accusations against you? If she does, Harold said firmly, then I withdraw any charge I laid against Eleanor Blackwood. No witch would risk returning to save the child she supposedly cursed. Caldwell's face darkened. One man cannot dismiss the concerns of an entire village. Perhaps not, Sebastian observed, but one child's miraculous recovery might change many minds. His silver gaze fixed on Caldwell with uncomfortable intensity. While certain private arrangements might be exposed to change others, the magistrate's face drained of all color. I don't know what you imply, sir. Don't you? Sebastian smiled coldly. I have walked this earth for centuries, magistrate. Human corruption changes its form, but never its essence. Your sudden wealth these past 5 years, coinciding with the taxes you collect for the county but never fully deliver, it tells a familiar story. Eleanor stared at Sebastian in shock, then at Caldwell, whose expression confirmed the accusation more effectively than any confession. Father Morris stepped away from the magistrate as if physical distance could separate him from this revelation. Lies, Caldwell hissed, though his voice lacked conviction. Slander without proof. Perhaps, Sebastian conceded with a shrug, but proof can be found if one knows where to look. Your ledgers, for instance, hidden beneath the floorboards of your study. The correspondence with your cousin in London who invests your surplus. He smiled, revealing the tips of his elongated canines. I have excellent night vision, magistrate, and the interesting habit of being able to enter homes without invitation when the occupant is not present, of course. The implications hung in the air like smoke. Caldwell stood frozen, caught between rage and terror. You are a demon, he whispered. Compared to some humans I have encountered, Sebastian replied evenly. I consider that a compliment. The tense standoff was interrupted by Margaret's sudden appearance in the doorway, her face transformed by cautious hope. The fever is breaking, she announced, her voice trembling. Emily is asking for water and bread. A collective exhale filled the room. Eleanor moved immediately to check on her patient, brushing past Caldwell without acknowledging him. In the small bedroom, Emily lay propped against her pillows, her face still pale, but her eyes clear and alert. Mrs. Blackwood, she greeted weakly. Mother says you made me better. Eleanor smiled, placing a gentle hand on the child's forehead. You made yourself better, brave girl. I merely helped your body fight the poison. From the mushrooms? Emily asked, guilt crossing her small face. I only tasted a tiny bit. It looked so pretty. Even pretty things can be dangerous, Eleanor replied, smoothing the girl's tangled hair. But you're going to be fine now. Emily glanced past Eleanor to where Sebastian stood in the doorway, his tall frame nearly filling it. Is your friend going away? She asked, a strange sadness in her voice. The one who glows like the moon. Eleanor turned to look at Sebastian, who remained motionless, his expression unreadable in the shadows. I don't know, she answered honestly. He comes and goes, as he pleases. He's sad, Emily observed with the uncanny perception of children. So old and so sad. Sebastian's lips parted slightly, as if this simple observation from a child had struck him more deeply than any accusation from the adults. Without responding, he turned and vanished into the main room of the cottage. When Eleanor followed moments later, she found a scene of barely contained chaos. Magistrate Caldwell stood red-faced and cornered by Harold Thorne and several neighbours who had apparently arrived after hearing of Emily's improvement. You pressed for her execution while embezzling town funds, Harold was saying, his previous fear of authority completely evaporated. How many others have you condemned to divert attention from your crimes? Caldwell's hand moved to his belt knife. Stand back! I am still the law in Ravenhollow. Not any more, came a new voice as the door opened to admit 2 uniformly dressed men, county officers from the larger town 20 miles distant. Magistrate James Caldwell, we have orders for your arrest on charges of financial misconduct and abuse of authority. The officers moved forward with practiced efficiency, disarming Caldwell before he could draw his weapon. We received an anonymous letter detailing specific evidence of your crimes, the senior officer explained, producing a sealed document, including the exact location of hidden accounts and correspondence. The county judge found it compelling enough to issue an immediate warrant. Eleanor's eyes sought out Sebastian, finding him watching from the shadows with quiet satisfaction. He caught her gaze and inclined his head slightly, acknowledgement of his hand in this sudden turn of events. As Caldwell was led away in restraints, protesting his innocence and casting venomous glares at Eleanor, the remaining villagers looked at one another in confusion, then at Eleanor with varying degrees of shame and uncertainty. "It seems," Father Morris said into the awkward silence, "that we have been hasty in our judgments." "A charitable description of attempted murder, Father," Sebastian commented dryly, stepping forward. The villagers drew back instinctively, their fear of him evident. "What becomes of Mrs. Blackwood now? Will she be welcomed back into your community or merely tolerated until the next convenient scapegoat is needed?" No one seemed able to answer this direct challenge. Eleanor herself was uncertain what she wanted: to return to a village that had so quickly turned against her, or to forge a new path elsewhere. She looked at Sebastian, wondering what role this immortal being intended to play in her future. Before anyone could speak further, a commotion arose outside, shouts and the sound of running feet. The door burst open again to admit a breathless young man from the village outskirts. "Riders approaching," he gasped. "At least 20, armed men flying no colors." "Bandits?" Harold asked, alarm replacing his earlier triumph. "No," Sebastian said, his voice suddenly tight. "Something far worse." He turned to Eleanor, his silver eyes reflecting urgency she hadn't seen before. "We must leave. Now." "What? Why?" Eleanor demanded. "Who are these riders?" Sebastian's expression darkened. "They are called the Covenant, hunters who track those they consider unnatural. Vampires, witches, werewolves, any who exist outside their definition of God's creation." His hand closed around Eleanor's arm. "And they have found us." Father Morris crossed himself again. "How do you know of such things?" "Because," Sebastian replied grimly, "they have been hunting me for 2 centuries. And now it seems they have finally caught my scent." He looked around at the gathered villagers. "Your hatred nearly killed an innocent woman tonight. Will you now stand with her against a true threat? Or will Ravenhollow fall to those who hunt in the name of a twisted faith?" The villagers exchanged uncertain glances, fear and confusion evident in their faces. Eleanor felt the weight of impending danger pressing down, coupled with the bizarre realization that her life had irrevocably changed the moment Sebastian appeared outside her cell. "What do they want?" she asked quietly. Sebastian's gaze was ancient and cold. "Everything they do not understand, everything that threatens their narrow view of existence." His voice dropped to a whisper, meant only for her. "And now it seems they want you." Eleanor barely had time to process Sebastian's warning before the sound of hoofbeats grew louder, echoing through the rain-slick streets of Ravenhollow. The villagers looked to one another with uncertain eyes, generations of suspicion battling against the immediate threat approaching their homes. "We have minutes, at most," Sebastian said, his voice taut with urgency. "These men will not distinguish between the innocent and the guilty. They burn first and consider questions unnecessary." "My daughter is still weak," Margaret Thorne protested, gathering Emily into her arms. "She cannot be moved." Sebastian's silver eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. "Then we make our stand here." He turned to address the villagers. "Anyone who wishes to survive this night should bar their doors and windows. Stay away from the light. Do not answer any call, no matter how familiar the voice." Father Morris stepped forward, his earlier antagonism replaced by grim determination. I know of these covenant hunters. They claim to serve God's will, but their methods mock everything holy. He looked at Eleanor with newfound respect. The church has a cellar. We can hide those who cannot fight. Sebastian seemed surprised by the priest's offer. A generous change of heart, Father. Not change, clarity, Father Morris replied. I have spent a lifetime distinguishing between true evil and mere difference. Tonight, I believe true evil rides toward us. Outside, the first riders entered the village square, torches blazing despite the rain. Sebastian moved to the window, keeping to the shadows as he observed them. 23 men, he confirmed, armed with blessed silver stakes and enough self-righteousness to drown a continent. Eleanor joined him, careful to remain hidden from view. The riders were formidable, tall men in dark clothing with crosses emblazoned on their leather armor. At their center rode a figure whose presence commanded attention even from a distance. Older than his companions, with a silver-streaked beard and eyes that seemed to burn with zealous purpose, he surveyed the village like a predator, assessing prey. Matthias, Sebastian whispered, a century of hatred compressed into the name. Their leader. How do they know about me? Eleanor asked, her voice barely audible. Sebastian's expression darkened. They didn't come for you initially. They hunt me, have done so since I escaped their trap in Vienna in 1687. He turned to face her directly. But now that they're here, they will sense your power. You think yourself an ordinary healer, Eleanor, but there is nothing ordinary about your gifts. Before she could question him further, the Covenant leader raised his hand, and his men dispersed through the village with practiced efficiency. 3 remained with Matthias, who guided his horse directly toward the Thorn cottage, as if drawn by some invisible beacon. They know we're here, Sebastian hissed. He turned to Harold. Is there another way out? The back door leads to the garden, and beyond that the forest, Harold replied, moving to gather what weapons he could find, a hunting knife, a wood-cutting axe. Sebastian nodded. Eleanor, you must go with the Thorns. Get Emily to the church cellar. And you? Eleanor demanded, suddenly afraid for this immortal being who had risked everything to save her. His smile was cold and ancient. I will provide a distraction. Before anyone could protest, he added, I have faced the Covenant many times. They cannot kill what they cannot catch. A heavy pounding on the door interrupted them. In the name of God and his holy covenant, open this door. Matthias's voice carried the weight of unquestioned authority. Sebastian's expression hardened. Go. Now. Eleanor hesitated only a moment before helping Margaret with Emily. The child clung weakly to her mother, wide eyes fixed on Sebastian. The Shadow Man will fight for us, she whispered. Yes, Eleanor assured her, though fear clutched at her heart. And we will fight too, in our way. As they slipped toward the back of the cottage, Eleanor glanced back to see Sebastian straightening his antiquated clothing, as if preparing for a formal engagement rather than a battle. The pounding at the door intensified. I rather like this waistcoat, she heard him mutter. Pity it will likely be ruined. Then he was opening the door, and Eleanor could delay no longer. She ushered the Thorns through the back entrance, praying that Sebastian's distraction would buy them enough time to reach the church. The night air was thick with tension as they crept through the garden, staying low among the vegetables and herbs. From all directions came shouts, the crash of doors being forced open, and the occasional scream as the Covenant methodically searched each dwelling. They're looking for something, Harold whispered as they reached the garden's edge, the dark forest looming beyond. Not something, Eleanor corrected grimly. Someone. Anyone who doesn't fit their definition of natural. They had just reached the tree line when Eleanor heard Sebastian's voice ring out from the cottage, carrying across the village with supernatural clarity. Matthias, he called, his tone almost conversational. 2 centuries you've chased me, and you still haven't learned proper manners. One customarily waits to be invited in. Eleanor froze, unable to stop herself from looking back. Sebastian stood in the open doorway of the Thorn cottage, facing Matthias and his men with aristocratic disdain. The Covenant leader had dismounted, his hand resting on an ornate silver sword at his hip. "Abomination," Matthias replied, his voice carrying equal distance. "You have eluded final judgment for too long." Sebastian laughed, the sound as beautiful as it was chilling. "And you have delivered your false judgment for too long. How many innocent lives has your covenant destroyed in its crusade? How many gifted humans burned alongside actual monsters? All who harbor unnatural powers threaten God's divine order," Matthias declared. "The witch you protect is no exception. The healer," Sebastian corrected, emphasizing the word, "has done nothing but save lives, including a child you would happily sacrifice to your dogma." Eleanor felt a hand tugging at her arm, Harold urging her to continue their escape. But something held her in place, some invisible thread connecting her to the confrontation unfolding across the village square. Matthias drew his silver sword, its blade glinting in the torchlight. "Where is she, vampire? Tell me, and perhaps I will grant you a quicker end than you deserve." Sebastian's response was to smile, revealing his elongated canines fully for the first time. "Come and find out." What happened next occurred with such speed that Eleanor could barely comprehend it. Sebastian seemed to blur, then vanish entirely, only to reappear behind one of Matthias's men. There was a wet sound, a strangled cry, and the man crumpled to the ground. The other two guards spun, weapons raised, but Sebastian was already gone, a shadow moving with impossible speed. "The forest!" Harold hissed urgently. "Now!" This time Eleanor allowed herself to be pulled away, helping Margaret support Emily as they fled between the trees. Behind them, shouts and the clash of weapons echoed through the night, punctuated by inhuman snarls that made the hair on Eleanor's neck stand on end. They had gone perhaps 50 yards into the forest when a figure stepped from behind a massive oak, blocking their path. One of the Covenant hunters stood before them, a crossbow loaded with what appeared to be a silver-tipped bolt leveled at Eleanor's chest. "Witch," he said simply, his young face twisted with hatred. Harold moved to place himself between the hunter and the women, but the man merely adjusted his aim. "Stay back, or I'll shoot you first and the witch second." Eleanor gently pushed Emily and Margaret behind her. "I am a healer," she said clearly. "Nothing more." The hunter's lip curled in disgust. "Healing beyond what is natural is witchcraft. The child's miraculous recovery is evidence enough. Evidence of knowledge, not magic," Eleanor argued, trying to keep her voice steady. "I used herbs and poultices, things any trained apothecary might employ." "Enough lies," the man snarled, his finger tightening on the crossbow's trigger. "Matthias will question you properly before you burn." A sudden rustle from above was the only warning, before a dark form dropped from the branches overhead, landing with lethal grace behind the hunter. Sebastian's hand closed around the man's throat before he could turn, lifting him bodily from the ground. "Your hunt ends here," Sebastian said softly, his silver eyes gleaming in the darkness. Then with a sharp twist, he snapped the man's neck. Eleanor gasped as the body fell to the forest floor, the crossbow discharging harmlessly into the earth. Sebastian stood over his kill, breathing heavily, not from exertion, Eleanor realized, but from something else. His chest heaved unnecessarily, his eyes wild, a smear of blood across his aristocratic features. "You're injured," she said, stepping toward him. Sebastian held up a hand, stopping her approach. "Not mine," he said tersely. "Matthias has brought 3 others like me, vampires who serve the Covenant. Captured, broken and bound to his will through blood magic. I was forced to end one of them." Horror crossed Eleanor's face. "You had to kill one of your own kind." "A mercy," Sebastian replied grimly. "What Matthias does to those he captures is far worse than death." He wiped the blood from his face with a handkerchief, his composure returning by degrees. "The others are searching the village. They will find us soon if we remain here." "The church," Harold reminded them urgently. "Father Morris said the cellar." "No," Sebastian interrupted. "The church is the first place they will look." These men know the habits of those they hunt, and humans always seek sanctuary in holy places. He looked at Eleanor intently. There is one place they won't expect us to go. Understanding dawned in her eyes. My cottage. At the very edge of their search pattern, and already examined once tonight by Magistrate Caldwell, Sebastian confirmed. They will not waste time searching it thoroughly again. But it's across the village, Margaret protested, holding Emily close. We'd never make it unseen. Sebastian's expression softened slightly as he looked at the child. Not by conventional means, no. He seemed to come to a decision. I can move faster than human eyes can track. I can carry the child and be at the cottage in moments. Emily looked up at him, her fever-weakened face showing no fear. Like flying? She asked. The ghost of a smile touched Sebastian's lips. Something like that, little one. He knelt to her level. But you must close your eyes and hold very still. Can you do that? Emily nodded solemnly. Margaret hesitated, maternal instinct warring with their desperate situation, before reluctantly transferring her daughter to Sebastian's arms. The vampire handled the child with surprising gentleness, cradling her against his chest. Follow as quickly as you can, he instructed the others. Stay in the forest until you reach the eastern edge, then make directly for Eleanor's cottage. I will watch for you. Eleanor met his eyes, 1,000 questions burning in her mind, but now was not the time. Be careful, was all she said. Sebastian nodded once, and then he was simply gone, vanished into the darkness, with Emily held securely in his immortal embrace. They moved as quickly and quietly as possible through the forest, following its curve around the village rather than cutting directly through. Occasionally they glimpsed torchlight between the trees as Covenant hunters searched the outskirts. Once they froze in place for nearly 10 minutes as a pair of hunters passed within yards of their hiding spot, discussing the vampire lord they had cornered at the Thorn cottage. Matthias wounded him, one said with grim satisfaction. The silver blade caught him across the ribs. He won't get far. Eleanor's heart constricted at the news. Wounded with silver, even a vampire would struggle to recover from such an injury. She increased their pace, worry for both Sebastian and Emily, driving her forward. When they finally reached the edge of the forest nearest her cottage, they paused to assess the situation. The small dwelling stood dark and seemingly abandoned, no sign of life or movement visible from their vantage point. 2 Covenant hunters stood at the main village road, nearly 100 yards away, but their attention was focused toward the center of Ravenhollow. Now, Harold whispered, and they darted from the tree line, running low across the small field that separated Eleanor's cottage from the forest. They reached the back door without incident, and Eleanor pushed it open with trembling hands. The interior was pitch dark, and for a moment, fear clutched at her heart. Had Sebastian made it? Was Emily safe? Close the door, came Sebastian's voice from the darkness. Relief flooded through Eleanor as Harold secured the door behind them. Only then did Sebastian risk lighting a single candle, its flame carefully shielded to prevent any light from escaping through the windows. Emily sat wrapped in a blanket by the cold hearth, her eyes wide but calm. The shadow man flies faster than the wind, she informed her parents as they rushed to embrace her. Eleanor's attention, however, was fixed on Sebastian. He stood rigidly by the far wall, one hand pressed against his side, his face even paler than usual. "You're hurt," she said, moving toward him. Sebastian attempted a dismissive gesture that turned into a grimace of pain. "Silver is problematic for my kind. The wound will heal but slowly." "Let me see," Eleanor insisted, her healer's instincts overriding any fear or uncertainty. When Sebastian hesitated, she added firmly, "I cannot help if I cannot assess the damage." With reluctant grace, Sebastian removed his hand from his side, revealing a deep slash that had cut through his fine clothing and into the flesh beneath. The wound was angry and red, the edges blackened as if burned, and it wept a dark fluid that was almost, but not quite, like human blood. Silver disrupts our natural healing, Sebastian explained through gritted teeth, and Matthias's blade is no ordinary weapon. It has been imbued with powers specifically designed to harm creatures like me. Eleanor examined the wound carefully, her mind racing through her knowledge of treatments. I need to clean it, at minimum, she decided, and I have herbs that might help with the burning. Sebastian's eyes followed her as she gathered supplies from her stores. Why would you help me? He asked quietly. You know what I am. What I've done? Eleanor paused, considering her answer carefully. You saved my life when my own neighbors would have taken it. You carried a sick child to safety while injured yourself. She met his silver gaze steadily. Whatever you are, whatever you've done, tonight you have shown more humanity than those who claim to defend it. Something flickered in Sebastian's ancient eyes, surprise, perhaps, or a deeper emotion he had not felt in centuries. Before he could respond, Harold approached from where he had been watching at the window. Riders, he reported tensely, coming this way. Sebastian straightened despite his pain. Matthias, he won't give up so easily. He fixed Eleanor with an intense stare. There's something you need to know about yourself, about why they hunt you. What do you mean? Eleanor asked, confusion and fear mingling in her chest. Your healing ability. It's not merely knowledge passed down through generations. Sebastian winced as he shifted position. It's an innate gift, a power in your blood that allows you to channel life energy itself. Eleanor stared at him in disbelief. That's impossible. I use herbs and remedies, nothing more. Do you? Sebastian challenged. When you treat the gravely ill, do you not feel something passing from you to them? A warmth, a connection, a transfer of strength. Eleanor's denial died on her lips as memories surfaced. The inexplicable fatigue that followed difficult healings, the sensation of something flowing through her hands into her patients, the way plants seemed to respond to her touch even before she harvested them. What am I? She whispered. Sebastian's expression softened. You are what my kind call a vitae custos, a guardian of life. Rare even in the centuries when magic flowed more freely in the world. He gestured to his wound, and your blood, your touch, could heal even this silver burn, though it would bind us in ways you cannot imagine. Before Eleanor could process this revelation, the sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder. Margaret clutched Emily closer, and Harold gripped his knife more tightly. They're surrounding the cottage, he reported grimly. Sebastian pushed himself away from the wall, standing tall despite his injury. Eleanor, he said urgently, there is a choice before you now. Stay and face Matthias, who will either kill you or use you as he has used others with gifts. Or what? She demanded, sensing his hesitation. Sebastian's silver eyes gleamed in the candlelight. Or come with me. Leave Ravenhollow behind. I can teach you what you are, help you understand your power. He extended his hand. But we must decide now. Outside, Matthias's voice rang out, commanding and terrible. Bring forth the witch and the vampire. Surrender them, and the rest of you may live. Eleanor stood frozen between worlds. The human community that had rejected then needed her, and the immortal being offering an escape into an unknown existence. Her gaze moved from Sebastian to the thorns, from her familiar cottage to the threatening voices outside. The choice before her was impossible, yet it had to be made. And as Matthias's men began to pound on her door, Eleanor knew that whatever she decided in the next moments would alter not just her fate, but the fate of everyone in Ravenhollow forever. The pounding at the door intensified as Eleanor's mind raced through her impossible choice. The wood began to splinter, and Margaret clutched Emily tighter to her chest, the child's eyes wide with terror. I cannot abandon them, Eleanor whispered, her gaze moving from Sebastian to the thorns. Not when they need protection. Something ancient and understanding flickered in Sebastian's silver eyes. Then we fight. He straightened despite his wound, summoning what remained of his supernatural strength. But know this, Eleanor Blackwood, what I told you is truth. Your power is the reason they hunt you, and it may be our only salvation." As if in answer to his words, the door burst open. Matthias stood framed in the doorway, his silver-streaked beard catching the moonlight, his ornate sword gleaming with menace. Behind him stood half a dozen Covenant hunters, their expressions cold and righteous. "At last," Matthias said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of hatred, "the abomination and the witch cornered together." His gaze settled on Eleanor with disturbing intensity. "Do you know what you are, woman? Do you understand the power that flows through your veins?" Eleanor stepped forward, positioning herself between the hunters and the thorns. "I am a healer," she declared, her voice steadier than she felt. "Nothing more, nothing less." Matthias laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "A guardian of life standing in a remote village, pretending to be a simple widow. How the mighty have fallen!" He gestured to his men. "Take her. Kill the others." Sebastian moved with blinding speed despite his injury, placing himself before Eleanor. "You'll have to go through me first, old friend." "Gladly," Matthias replied, raising his sword. "Though you are hardly at your best, Sebastian, the silver weakens you by the moment." Eleanor watched in horror as the hunters advanced. Harold stood protectively before his family, his hunting knife pitiful against their weapons. This was her fault, all of it. These people would die because of what she apparently was, a truth she hadn't even known herself. Time seemed to slow as a strange warmth began to build within Eleanor's chest. The sensation was familiar. The same energy she felt when treating the gravely ill, but magnified hundredfold. It spread through her limbs, tingling along her fingers, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. "Sebastian," she whispered, reaching for him. "I think I understand." He turned, his silver eyes widening as he saw the faint luminescence beginning to emanate from her skin. "Eleanor!" Without hesitation, she pressed her palm to his wound. The connection was immediate and overwhelming, a circuit completed between immortal and guardian. Sebastian gasped, his back arching as Eleanor's power flowed into him, healing the silver burn, restoring his supernatural strength. The cottage filled with blinding light that radiated from Eleanor in waves. Matthias stumbled back, shielding his eyes, his men crying out in confusion and pain. "Impossible!" Matthias hissed. "No guardian has manifested such power in centuries." As the light receded, Sebastian stood transformed, his wound healed, his posture straight, his eyes blazing with renewed vigor and something more. A golden ring now encircled his silver irises, marking the bond that had formed between them. "You forget, Matthias," Sebastian said, his voice resonating with newfound power. "What happens when our kinds connect? You have used captured guardians to power your blood magic for centuries, taking their life force drop by drop." His lips curved into a dangerous smile. "But a willing bond, that is something else entirely." Matthias raised his sword with a snarl. "Kill them all!" The hunters charged forward, but Sebastian was ready. He moved like lightning, disarming the first man with such force that the hunter's arms snapped audibly. The second swung a silver chain that Sebastian caught bare-handed, the metal no longer burning his flesh. Eleanor felt the connection between them, a shimmering thread of energy that linked her life force to Sebastian's immortal power. Through it, she sensed his exhilaration, his determination to protect her at any cost, but the fight was far from equal. More hunters poured through the door, and Matthias himself advanced on Eleanor, his sword raised. "Your power will serve the Covenant, witch," he growled. "As it was always meant to." Harold intercepted him, swinging his hunting knife with desperate courage. Matthias parried the blow easily, then drove his sword through Harold's shoulder. The man fell with a cry of pain as Margaret screamed. Something snapped within Eleanor then, a final barrier between her conscious mind and her true nature. She raised her hands, and pure golden light erupted from her palms, throwing Matthias across the room to crash against the far wall. "You will not harm anyone else," she declared, her voice carrying an authority she had never before possessed. The cottage trembled with the force of her awakened power. Objects began to rise from surfaces, books, jars, utensils, all hovering as if gravity had surrendered its hold. The hunters froze in confusion and fear. Sebastian appeared at her side, his hand closing around hers. "Control it, Eleanor," he urged. "Channel the power, don't let it control you." She nodded, forcing her breathing to slow, directing the swirling energy with conscious intent. The floating object settled gently back into place, but the golden light continued to emanate from her in controlled pulses. Matthias struggled to his feet, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. "Do you think awakening your power changes anything?" he spat. "The Covenant has hunted your kind for millennia. Others will come after me." "Perhaps," Sebastian replied coolly, "but you will not be among them." With inhuman speed, he crossed the room and seized Matthias by the throat, lifting the man until his feet dangled above the floor. Eleanor felt Sebastian's murderous intent through their bond. "Wait," she commanded, moving to stand beside him. "Death isn't the only punishment." Sebastian's silver-gold eyes flickered to her questioningly. Eleanor placed her hand on Matthias's chest, directly over his heart. "You have twisted the power of life to serve death for too long," she told the Covenant leader. "No more." Golden light seeped from her fingers into Matthias's body. The man convulsed, a silent scream frozen on his face. When the light faded, Sebastian released him, and Matthias crumpled to the floor. "What did you do?" Sebastian asked with quiet awe. "I severed his connection to the blood magic he's been using," Eleanor explained, surprised at her own innate understanding of her abilities. "He's just a man now, an ordinary aging man with no power over others." The remaining hunters looked on in horror as their seemingly invincible leader huddled on the floor, suddenly frail and diminished. Without his supernatural authority binding them, uncertainty crept into their expressions. "Your crusade ends tonight," Sebastian told them. "Take your master and leave Ravenhollow. Tell the Covenant that this village and its people are under the protection of a guardian and her vampire." His voice dropped to a dangerous purr. "And if any return seeking vengeance, they will not receive the mercy we have shown you." The hunters exchanged glances before the oldest among them nodded grimly. Two men helped Matthias to his feet, the once imposing leader now resembling nothing so much as a confused old man. As they retreated through the doorway, the hunter paused. "This isn't over," he warned. "The Covenant has many chapters across many lands." "Then perhaps it's time someone brought light to those dark corners," Eleanor replied, her confidence growing with each moment. After the hunters departed, the cottage fell into an exhausted silence. Margaret tended to Harold's wound, while Emily watched wide-eyed from her blanket by the hearth. Outside, dawn was beginning to break, the first faint light creeping through the windows. "Sebastian," Eleanor said suddenly, concern flooding through her. "The sun?" He raised a hand to calm her fears. "Our bond has changed more than you realize." He approached the window, pulling back the curtain to allow a shaft of early morning light to touch his hand. Where before it would have burned him instantly, now his skin merely reddened slightly. "Not immune," he explained, "but no longer fatal. Another gift from our connection." Eleanor's legs suddenly felt weak as the night's events caught up with her. She sank onto a chair, the golden light that had surrounded her finally fading completely. "What happens now?" she whispered. Sebastian knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "That depends on what you want, Eleanor Blackwood. Our bond can be severed if you wish it, though the process would be unpleasant for both of us." "And if I don't wish it severed?" she asked, searching his ancient eyes. A smile touched his lips, softer than any she had seen on his face before. "Then a new life awaits us. There are others like you, guardians who have hidden their abilities for generations. They need guidance, protection." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "And there are places where my kind and yours once lived in harmony before the Covenant's crusade drove us into shadow. "You speak of leaving Ravenhollow," Eleanor said, glancing around at her cottage, the only home she had known since Thomas's death. "Eventually, yes," Sebastian admitted. "The Covenant will return, despite our warnings. We would need to find safer haven." His gaze grew distant. "I have a property in the mountains to the north, remote, defensible. We could gather others there, create a sanctuary." Eleanor felt the weight of the decision before her, to leave behind everything familiar, to embrace a new existence she barely understood. Yet something had awakened within her that could never be put back to sleep. She was a guardian of life, and that truth changed everything. "Before any decisions are made," she said, rising from her chair, "there are wounded who need tending." She moved to Harold's side, examining the sword wound in his shoulder. "And explanations owed to those who stood by me when it mattered most." As morning fully broke over Ravenhollow, the village slowly emerged to assess the aftermath of the night's events. Word spread quickly of the Covenant's retreat and of Eleanor's defense of the village. Those who had been quickest to condemn her now found themselves ashamed, while those who had sheltered in the church cellar at Father Morris's direction emerged with questions that had no easy answers. By midday, Eleanor's cottage had become an impromptu gathering place. Father Morris arrived with bread and wine, a peace offering that Eleanor accepted graciously. The priest regarded Sebastian with cautious respect, theological certainties shaken by the night's revelations. "I have spent my life believing in absolute categories of good and evil," Father Morris confessed. "It seems the world is more complex than my teaching suggested." "The oldest truth in existence," Sebastian replied with the faintest smile, "and one that has taken me centuries to fully appreciate." As the day progressed, Eleanor used her newly awakened abilities to heal those who had been injured in the Covenant's search. Each healing strengthened her understanding of her power, the way it flowed through her fingers, how it connected her momentarily to each person she touched, the careful balance required to give life without draining her own. Sebastian stayed by her side, his guidance subtle but essential as she navigated her awakening. Through their bond, he shared centuries of accumulated knowledge about guardians and their abilities. In quiet moments, Eleanor sensed fragments of his past, lonely centuries, brief connections with humans who inevitably aged and died, the constant pursuit by those who feared his nature. As evening approached, Eleanor found herself standing at the edge of her garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Sebastian joined her, his presence now as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. "They want me to stay," Eleanor said quietly. "The village has offered apologies, promises of protection." "And what do you want?" Sebastian asked, his voice gentle. Eleanor turned to face him, studying the face that had become so dear to her in such a short time. "I want to understand what I am. I want to find others like me." She took a deep breath. "And I want to help create the sanctuary you spoke of, a place where differences are not merely tolerated, but celebrated." Sebastian's expression softened with something that might have been hope, an emotion he had nearly forgotten over his long existence. "Then we shall build it together." He hesitated before adding, "But know that the path will not be easy. The Covenant has deep roots, and there will be others who fear what they do not understand." "I'm counting on it," Eleanor replied with newfound confidence. "Fear only exists where ignorance thrives. Perhaps it's time to bring light to those shadows." Sebastian smiled, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "You are remarkable, Eleanor Blackwood. In all my centuries, I have never met anyone quite like you." "Nor I you, Sebastian," she returned softly. Through their bond, she felt the complex tapestry of his emotions, desire mingled with protectiveness, hope entwined with lingering sadness. "Will you tell me your full name someday?" she asked. "Your history? Someday," he promised, "when we have the luxury of time for such long tales." A small cough interrupted them. They turned to find Emily standing nearby, her color much improved, watching them with curious eyes. "Are you leaving, Mrs. Blackwood?" the child asked directly. Eleanor knelt to the girl's level. Yes, Emily, there are others who need help, and things I must learn about myself. Emily considered this with childlike seriousness. Will you come back to visit? Of course, Eleanor promised, smoothing the girl's hair. And perhaps someday, when you're older, you might visit us. The child's eyes brightened at this prospect. At the Shadow Man's castle in the mountains? Sebastian chuckled softly. It's hardly a castle, little one. But yes, you would be welcome there. Emily nodded, satisfied with this arrangement. Mother says to tell you supper is ready. Everyone is waiting. As they followed the child back to the cottage, where the Thorns and Father Morris had prepared a meal, Eleanor felt a profound sense of transition. This would be her last night in Ravenhollow, the place where she had known both happiness and sorrow, where she had lived as an ordinary widow before discovering her extraordinary nature. Tomorrow, she would leave with Sebastian to begin a new chapter, one filled with uncertainty but also with purpose. They would seek out other guardians, offer protection to those hunted by the Covenant, and perhaps, in time, create a world where beings of all natures could exist in harmony. As they reached the doorway of her cottage, now filled with the warm light of candles and the scent of fresh bread, Sebastian paused, his silver-gold eyes meeting hers. "Are you certain?" he asked one final time. "The human world has comforts that my existence cannot offer." Eleanor smiled, taking his hand in hers. Through their bond flowed all the answer he needed. Courage tempered with resolve, curiosity brightened by hope, and beneath it all, the first tendrils of a love that promised to span not just distance, but time itself. "I've never been more certain of anything," she replied. "Whatever comes, we face it together." As they stepped over the threshold to join their unlikely gathering of friends, the last light of day surrendered to the first stars of evening. In Ravenhollow, a new legend was already taking shape. The tale of the widow who discovered her true nature and the immortal who helped her embrace it. A story of darkness and light, fear and courage, endings and beginnings. A story that was just beginning.